Cool. Well, thanks everyone for joining. So this meeting is to discuss the epic to migrate from the SOAP API to the REST API, and obviously address any concerns as well that people may have. So just a very quick introduction. So we're trying to do this now, as part of technical debt mainly, because we're using like a very outdated gem that hasn't been updated for 2 years, and we sometimes run into some issues with SOAP as well. And in general, the REST API should be nicer to work with. I had a discussion with Ruben yesterday as well, and there's probably a couple of things that I should mention first. One is in terms of working in parallel. I think we agreed that would be possible, and which means that we may be able to deliver this relatively fast, because most of the backend team can work on this together. So the other thing is that what will happen is that we probably want to use feature flags for all of this work, and keep at least for a couple of releases the SOAP API calls as well. So I would imagine this to work like when a feature flag is enabled to use REST, then it will go through the REST way, and otherwise it will just go through the old SOAP way, and that will help us, to also fix any issues pretty quickly, that may arise, so we don't have to put a fix in production later and so on. But that also means that after this is done, we're going to have to create some follow-ups to clean up that and and remove SOAP completely as well. So that's not part of this epic, but and definitely not part of this milestone, but it's something that in future milestones we're going to have to do as well. So yeah, any questions or thoughts so far? Yeah, if not, I'm going to keep talking anyway. But yeah, basically, I don't think this is going to impact other teams much. Especially, I wouldn't expect this to impact the front-end team, for example. But it may impact, especially other growth teams, slightly in terms of specs. So this, I would expect this to be pre-isolated anyway, but the specs may break if I'm right, because obviously we're going to change some of these things. Some of the VCRs wouldn't work because they're in XML at the moment, and we may have to be a bit clever with the specs because we have the feature flags. So we may have to do something similar perhaps with the specs, and have specs running depending on having REST or SOAP, or just sort of testing both somehow, maybe using feature flags. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that spawned an idea for me, but also to talk about the specs. I mean, it makes sense to definitely test both. And yeah, I think is assuming that the test suite runs and tests both paths, the SOAP and REST paths, makes sense. And I think this milestone, we don't have a lot of like new feature development, so we don't have to worry, at least on our team, about like having to build a new feature that needs to be built in SOAP and in REST. But are you aware of any other teams that have like new features that might infringe on that?
I am not, but it may happen that some some things may still touch certain areas. Like I don't think there's going to be like a new addition, like a new SOAP call or something like that. I wouldn't expect that. I don't think that happens very often anyway. But we may touch like existing code, and I think the conflicts here are going to be especially on the specs, because someone may say touch something on the sign up flow, and we still call the old SOAP there. And when someone goes to the spec and adds things there, is going to add things like if they were testing it with SOAP. But actually, at the same time, they're going to be working adding these REST calls. So we might be, this other person may be missing the REST part of it. And I think that's the only conflict that may happen there. I'm not sure what's the best way to resolve that, but obviously the fulfillment team is going to have to be a bit more proactive there, and maybe try to see when something gets merged if there are any existing message requests that may affect that, and maybe help a little bit with the rebase, basically. So to pull those changes in and maybe just help with the specs a little bit as well, so other teams are not like blocked because of that.
Okay, so for the transition, is it just going to be from SOAP to REST, or are we going to do any enhancement to whatever we have now, like in terms of the way the integration is currently? So is there going to be any improvement in the integration, or is it just transitioning, making the SOAP calls into REST API calls?
So I think the primary focus is going to be just to the transition, like from SOAP to REST. But as part of that, we may identify like some certain areas. I'm not sure where we can actually maybe, I don't know, imagine, just to give an example that you may notice. But for instance, if before we had to do like 2 SOAP calls, and with REST we just need 1 call, then there's definitely an improvement there that we can make. So if we find something like that, I think we should definitely go for that. But I haven't digged much into what changes, and again, it may be slightly different. I think there's going to be some refactor in terms of things like IDs and names, subscription IDs and subscription names. I think something has changed in that sense. Like we may have to use obviously the names and so on, but we're calling the REST APIs, or the parameters might be slightly different. So we may have to refactor things a bit though as part of this.
Okay.
Cool. Ruben, is there anything else that you can think of that may be useful here, or anything that we should be aware of in terms of like working parallel and so on?
Yeah, I was thinking something similar to Aishwarya. So I think we can also take advantage to try to refactor some code, especially to try to abstract parts where we are using the sub client maybe directly instead of using some kind of abstractions or service class. Yeah, we can try to do that, especially present policy plans, or to migrate from Zuora to Stripe. So yeah, probably we can try to do some improvements to the interactions with the SOAP API here.
Cool. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And maybe as part of that abstraction, it will also help us to also move the current code there to those services and so on, so we can just use the feature flag in there, I guess. So yeah.
Do we anticipate any like issues with having, because some of the workflows probably reach out to multiple like SOAP calls at once, and we're going to be changing out like pieces at a time. Do we anticipate any issues with swapping like a specific SOAP call with an API, with a REST API call? And I mean, I assume that the backend of Zuora is hooked up in a way where it wouldn't really matter, but I'm just curious if we anticipate any problems with swapping out one REST API call, and then the rest being SOAP, and possibly running into any like problems with that, not switching like a certain like entire workflow at once. I mean, I guess it's just trial and error at that point, in some ways, but yeah.
I think, I mean, we may have some issues, but I think it's going to be trial and error. We can, test things on staging as well and see if something happens. What we do know, I'm going to paste their link. There's a few changes that from SOAP to REST that may be relevant, and this is specified in the Zuora portal. It mentions specify account numbers instead of account IDs. I don't know. There's a few things there. Specify the order action type, subscription. So there's a few changes there that we should be aware of. I don't know how those are going to impact in the backend, like in Zuora. Again, I think we'll be expecting the same, as you mentioned. That Zuora should be the same. It should be the same backend behind the scenes. But it's going to be a lot of this is going to be trial and error, and hopefully we can test this on staging. Again, I'm going to try to push to have the production copy environment, because then that's like a real staging, which we can test things better, and it will help us a lot in this scenario as well. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm giving a look to the node. As far as I recall, the orders object used to be only available on the REST API. I recall that was a requirement from Wilson and from the people using Salesforce. They wanted to use order objects from Zuora, but that was not possible to do with SOAP. So looks like we are required to use orders now with REST. And so that leads me to think that probably it will impact the development time for the flows related to creation of subscriptions and amendments, because I think those are the things that work with orders. So I'm trying to say that that part is new for the application. We're using orders now, so we will need to give a look to the documentation regarding that in case it's required to use with REST. It's mandatory. I mean.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Should we create an issue for doing that investigation, or we can just do it as part of the subscription changes?
Yeah, I can give a look into that today, and we create an issue if required, or put a note on the issue that related to the subscription flow, new subscription workflow. I can take care of that.
Cool. Sounds good.
One other quick question, not exactly related to the SOAP to REST conversion, but just around Zuora in general. Do we have any like documents or like diagrams for how the different like business objects relate to each other? I feel like that would be useful just in general to have, especially for new new devs coming onto the team or like people on the outside wanting to know how things are hooked up. But just to know how all the different objects kind of relate to each other might be helpful just to like visualize it. Do you know if we have anything like that available?
For SOAP, Zuora provides a diagram with a relation between all objects they use in their SOAP API. Not sure if that's the case for REST, but yeah, we may need to give a look to the documentation.
Cool. I'll look for it.
As part of this whole thing, I think it would, also be helpful if we can, depict in a diagram how the customer interacts with Zuora, like the relationships. For example, like every subscription has a corresponding order. Maybe, like, if we, as and when we are doing this, it would be good if we can document it somewhere.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think one of the things that, I don't know if I create an issue already, but I'm going to create an issue otherwise, is that we should better document like development flows and any development changes that are relatively big in the code base. Because at the moment, I mean, we have the main README in the customers app, but for developers and for development, we don't have great documentation. And I think at the same time as we do this, it might be a great idea just to start documenting, these flows as well, and when we call the new REST API and so on. So yeah, definitely. Cool. So yeah, any other questions?
James, can we have a public channel for this task? Because
Definitely.
the trials one was very helpful.
Yeah. I'm just gonna create one as well. Yeah, good stuff. Well, cool. I think if there's nothing else, I think I'm gonna upload this to YouTube probably. And yeah, any further questions, I mean, we can ask in the channel that I'm gonna create or in the Epic itself as well. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.